Hilarious, yes. Here's the thing. Here's a great question we all kind of should wrestle with a little bit. When we stop and think about it, what is it that charges you the most? What is it that gets you that you respond with the most anger or the most passion or the most energy? What is it that will move you from one spot to another, that you feel like you've got to speak, you've got to act, you've got to do something because you're just so charged about it? And it's good to try to figure out what those issues are. And what I mean by this, I don't mean like just slow people in the fast lane, and I don't mean just messed up drive-through orders, which is usually where minds tend to go. I get mad about those drive-through orders. I told them I wanted no ketchup, and they gave me ketchup only. And I get that. I mean, sometimes we want to speak out, but usually a messed up drive-through order does not result in you organizing a party of 15, 20 people with a sign to go out front of that local Burger King or McDonald's or Wendy's and say, we don't want ketchup. We don't want ketchup. Okay, so what is it then that moves us beyond that, to where we feel like we've got to speak, we got to write a letter to their congressman, or we got to get going? What is it that gets us all charged up? There are times that you're frustrated at work, but what is it that finally you say, I need to get to the boss or go above them. I need to make a statement, or I need to leave and quit. What is it that pushes us beyond that point? And so that's that question to ask. And for me, I have a couple, I can really sum up the things that charge me the most in one word when it comes to anger or that type of passion that just makes my eye twitch and I need to speak out. And I'm not talking about annoying people at the bus station. Okay, I mean, there's those people that they will call me and they will say, yeah, I was wondering, how long did it take me to get to the bus station? And I'll tell them, well, where are you coming from? Oh, that would be nice. Yeah, I'm coming from my house. Well, where do you live? Well, I'm not giving you my address. Then I don't know how long it's going to take you to get here. And granted that I get passionate about that, but there's things that will move me beyond to where I just go, okay? And that would be inconsistencies. Inconsistencies drive me absolutely to the point of needing to sometimes speak out. And what I mean by inconsistencies, I'm talking a certain level of hypocrisy that goes beyond the norm. Like, for example, when people are all about saying we need to be pro-gender change and transgender, we need to be yes, you can change your gender because just because you were born one way doesn't mean you have to stay that way. And then when a lady like Rachel here says, hey, I had surgery, now I'm African American, and people freak out. And they go, you can't change your ethnicity. You have to accept the way you were born. And I'm serious, this was all over the news like a year ago. And people were like, you have to accept the way you were born. You can't change your ethnicity. You can't go from white to black. You can't do that. And I just wanted to yell out, tell that to Michael Jackson. And I wanted to yell out, are you kidding me? You have to accept the way you're born. Doesn't plumbing count in that issue? Because you're born a certain way, and if you can surgically alter the gender, shouldn't you also surgically alter your ethnicity? Why does one count and not? And they keep saying gender is a racial issue. It's a racial issue. Well, then if you're changing your gender is like changing your racial issue, then this should count too. And it's inconsistent, and it drives me bonkers. I get really frustrated with it. And another case that's happened really recently, like over the past 3 weeks, is there's these group of feminists that are all about pro-choice. They're like, we fight for the right to choose to abort or not to abort. It's your choice. We're pro-choice. Then it got released that in Canada, there's gender-selected abortion going on at a very alarming rate, where when people find out that they're pregnant and they find out that the sex of the baby is a girl, not a boy, they're aborting the girl. They're having an abortion. It's called gender-selected abortion, and it usually goes in favor of the sons. If we have a son, we keep it. If we have a daughter, we abort it. That's what's happening all across Canada. It's becoming a real major issue. And so the same feminists are showing up yelling, you can't abort that baby. That baby has a right to live. The same pro-choicers who said we have the right to choose. We have the right to choose. It's not a life anyways. It's just tissue. Life happens after birth, so it doesn't matter. You're not aborting a baby. You're aborting tissue. Suddenly you're aborting girls. Well, you can't do that. And I'm like, this is strongly inconsistent. And then there's an author. Her name is Mara Hifendel. And she wrote a book. And she said in the book, yes, we are pro-choice, except for when we're not. Direct quote. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You're pro-choice except for when you're, and so this is the inconsistencies that I just want to grab a sign and say, hi, here's a sign. It comes with a sticker. It says I'm a moron. Please wear it because you're inconsistent and it's driving the whole nation to a really weird place. And so this is what's going on. And so here's what's happening with Paul. He is dealing with people who are just moved to a point of passion that they're reacting. Now, in this case, they're reacting against Paul because Paul's talking about Jesus. They don't want to hear it. And so they start a riot. They get people together and they riot against Paul. And so Paul's kind of dealing with that type of level of passion in these people. So when you start thinking about things that might move you to want to respond against something, that's who Paul's working with, okay? So then how do you respond to that in a way that really helps the situation rather than makes it worse? So what do you do? So it's going to be kind of what we're looking at here is Paul's ministry and how it has to completely change because of the cultural issues that are happening. In some cases, Paul's going to have to relocate. But at one point, he's going to just stand his ground and he's going to have to do something as a direct result of this, and he's going to have to engage it directly. And the question is going to be, how do we do that? And what must that message be? How do we handle that? So we're going to kind of look at all the different fronts of this, and it's going to be fun. It really is. It's going to be something really necessary for the church of today. So Acts chapter 17, as we go, continuing our way verse by verse through the book of Acts. We've been in this now for over a year. Moving Esther out of that middle, that little transition that we had for our Peter, Paul, Esther series. Just looking at Acts alone, we've been in it for about a year. Isn't that exciting? And so we're working our way through it. We're getting close to the end. There's 28 chapters, so we're well over halfway. So we're getting there. We're actually going to do verse 5 all the way to the end of 17 today, all the way to verse 34. So we're going to finish up 17 and then hit Corinth next week, and that's going to be a great time because Corinth is that's a messed up city. So hitting with Thessalonica, this is where Paul is at. He's at Thessalonica, and he's working on his Macedonian secondary mission trip as he's gone across the sea, and he's working in Macedonia now, and he's trying to figure out what's happening. He was working in Philippi with Lydia and the church plant there, and he went from Philippi, and he went over to Thessalonica. That's kind of like going from Grand Rapids to Benton Harbor because, Benton Harbor really needs Jesus. so that's where he's going. So here's what happens in verse 5. So Paul is already there, and he's already been preaching. He's been preaching in the synagogue. He's been there for a little while. He's talking about Jesus. Here's the response to verse 5. But the Jews became jealous. Now, it says jealous. If your translation says that, it should be the word envy. That is a better translation of this word. Many people think jealousy and envy are synonyms, and they're not. Jealousy predominantly is between people about relationships, where envy is about status, success, or things, wanting to get something that you don't have. Jealousy is trying to hang on to a relationship you already have, like a jealous husband wanting his wife and only his wife to treat him as husband and vice versa, okay? Or wanting God is a jealous God, wanting us to treat him and only him as God, okay? So that's jealousy. This is different. This is envy. So we should use the word envy here. But the Jews became, if you will, envious, and they brought together some scoundrels from the marketplace, formed a mob, and started a riot in the city, attacking Jason's house, which is bold because if a guy wears a hockey mask, I'm not going there. Okay, anyway, so they go to Jason's house. They search for them to bring them out to the public assembly. When they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here too, and Jason has received them as guests. They are all acting contrary to Caesar's decree, saying that there is another king, Jesus." The Jews stirred up the crowd and the city's officials who heard these things. So taking a security bond from Jason and the others, they released them. So basically, Jason and the others post bail. Okay, they say, okay, you know what, if you give us X amount of dollars, we'll just let you go. Okay, we got that money, here you go, and they let them go. Now, what's happening here is there's what type of response of the Jews? The Jews became Envious, okay? They saw the success and the reception of Paul, and they wanted it. They wanted it so bad. The Jews became sneeches because they didn't have stars upon theirs, and they wanted those who had the star belly sneeches to have bellies like stars. And so this is where they're at. And they're just like, this isn't right. We should have that too. So what they do is that they respond by Paul's message. Rather than joining Paul and trying to say, hey, tell us more about Jesus, we'll follow Jesus, be part of his kingdom, and let's all be heirs of the king together. No, no, no. Instead, the Jews responded by doing what in the city? A riot. They decided to riot. They decided to go ahead and go to different stores, loot it, break windows, take home plasma TVs. They decided to riot, like our country is so famous for doing. But then who was responsible for the riot? Who was blamed for the riot? Paul. They blamed Paul for the riot. They're like, these men, we're rioting. We're shouting in the streets and making a mess and just destroying things. We're rioting and throwing things and screaming and shouting. Whose fault is it? It's Paul's fault. It's Paul's fault. Now let me ask you something. Is it Paul's fault that they are rioting? Is it Paul's fault that these people are turning over cars and throwing people's cell phones down drains? I know they're not doing exactly that, but is it Paul's fault? Absolutely not. But they're blaming Paul. Of course, that only happens in these uncivilized times of the past. That doesn't happen today at all, does it? When a guy by the name of Trump tries to hold a rally and tries to say, yeah, I can run for president too, and then he starts speaking, and then while he's speaking, here are some actual photographs of people that started rioting outside of Trump's rallies. And they're kicking on, this one guy's jumping up and down on a police car, and they're kicking over lights, and they're breaking windows. And here's what they're saying. The people, when they got interviewed, many got arrested and kicked off the premise. When they were being interviewed, they said, I kid you not, well, it's Trump's fault. It's his fault. It's because of what he's saying. He's talking in extreme ways. So, of course, he's going to get people who were responding in extreme manners. Well, here's the problem. These weren't Trump supporters. These were supporters of Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. These were their supporters that were rioting, but they were blaming Trump for the riots. We're doing this because of Trump. If he didn't speak, we wouldn't do this. Well, doesn't Trump have a right to speak? I mean, like him or not like him, who cares? Doesn't he have a right to speak? Isn't it his right to run for candidacy? And if people want to say, we don't like you, that's fine, but going violent, that's Trump's fault? That's really weird. That's like the riots here in the Bible where they're rioting about Paul, and then they're saying, see, it's Paul's fault. It's Paul's fault. If he wasn't here and if Jason hadn't brought him into his home, we wouldn't be rioting. It's all their fault. Is that a fair assessment? No, but whose side does the governing officials take? Both in Paul's time and what sides do the governing officials and the media take here? They take the side of the mob over and over again. Throughout history, they choose the side of the mob, as if to say, hey, you're acting like a bully, and we'll go ahead and honor you for it by giving you what you want, because that seems like the easiest way to peace. Because, we don't like taking the hard way at all, even though the hard way and the right way are often the same thing. They want to take the easy way. Psychologists call this the act of the cognitive miser, that humans are lazy thinkers and choose the path of least resistance. So when you have a mob, you can either confront the mob and deal with the mob, or you can pacify the mob. And you're supposed to confront and deal with, but it's easier to pacify. And so that's what the media does. And so that's what people do. And of course, there's ratings involved and people viewing and buying either subscriptions to things or getting online to view things so they get more advertising. It's marketing charged, absolutely financially charged. And still, people side on behalf of the mobs over and over again. And that's what happens to Paul. Do they say, hey, Paul, you're speaking, whatever, let's talk with you, let's have a trial? He's not even there. They're dealing with Jason and his people, and they're like, okay, where is Paul? Well, Paul actually is he's not here right now. Please leave a message. But they don't deal with that. Instead, they say, hey, the mob is right. Let's go ahead and let's arrest Jason and the people here. So what ends up happening then is that Jason and the church that are involved there at Thessalonica send Paul and company to Berea. Okay, so they send them out to Berea. And verses 10 through 15, here's what goes on. Then it says, as soon as it was night, the brothers sent Paul and Silas off to Berea. On arrival, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. The people here were more open-minded than those in Thessalonica, since they welcomed the message with eagerness and examined the scriptures daily to see if the things were so, which is neat because Paul is saying Jesus is the Messiah. So they're like, really? He fulfills all the scriptures? Well, let's open it up and find out. How does Jesus fulfill this prophecy, this prophecy, this prophecy? And so Paul's saying, here's what had happened. Here's how he fulfilled it. And so daily they're dealing this to see if it's so. Consequently, many of them, what? Believed. Many of them believed, including a number of the prominent Greek women as well as men, which means you're going to have a church now. Because apparently you need the women in order to have a church in this area. They're the ones that seem to have the leadership, the finances, the marketing, whatever it takes to make it happen. So there's this constant emphasis of the women being involved. So prominent Greek women as well as men. But when the Jews from Thessalonica found out that God's message had been proclaimed by Paul at Berea, they went there too. So basically to go to Berea, Paul went from Benton Harbor to Kalamazoo. And the people in Benton Harbor said, we can go to Kalamazoo. That's not too far away. Why not? So they get up into the little Volvos and they start heading on down in their little cars, and they head on down there to deal with the issue. So they came there too, agitating and disturbing the crowds, trying to create a riot in Kalamazoo as well. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul away to go to the sea, but Silas and Timothy stayed on there. Here's what happens. They send Paul... I know Kalamazoo geographically is not the perfect place of an example, but it works for geographic, distant purposes. So they sent him to they basically sent him on a Greyhound bus, and they say, here, go to St. Louis. And he passes Chicago. He doesn't stop at Chicago. And when Paul gets sent by the sea, where he ends up going to Athens, he bypasses Thessaly. Okay, so a lot of people wonder, why did you bypass Thessaly? Well, if you're in Kalamazoo and you go to Chicago, if people traveled from Benton Harbor to Kalamazoo, do you think they'll travel to Chicago? It's not that far away. So yeah, they'll travel there. But to St. Louis? Well, that's going to really, we might not even get their papers. So it's not going to be as noticeable. And so Paul gets onto a boat and he goes, but Silas and Timothy stay in Berea. That's interesting to note, okay? It's almost like Paul says, I need to be a ninja at the next city because this is getting ridiculous. So let me go there, and let me be covert about this. Let me try to be one person walking around, figuring this out, and then I'll come back and I'll send for you if more needs to happen. So those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving instructions for Silas and Timothy to come to him as quickly as possible, they departed. We don't know how much time they stayed in Athens at this point. We don't know if Paul showed up in Athens and went, holy cow, look at this city. Go tell Timothy and Silas to get over here. Or if they hung around for a while and looked along the land and then decided after a little bit, wow, there's a big job here. Athens is important. Go people and get Timothy and Silas and tell them to get here. Tell them to get here now. Either way, Timothy and Silas need to be alerted to get to Athens. And so what on earth is going on in Athens? And what we find out is that Athens is the central location of the culture for Rome. Okay, it is that key part of Greco-Roman culture. It is a cultural influence. It is that prime spot, that prime city. This is where the newspapers are made. This is where the main broadcast of the news is at. Everybody else has their local channels, but eventually they link up to like the Today Show. Right? Athens would be like New York City type of a thing. This is where we will find Jimmy Fallon. This is where we will find Almighty Queen Oprah and all those shows that used to be on from time to time, and some of them still are. A lot of them from New York. Okay, so this is where Paul is, and he sees it, and he goes, I cannot do this job by myself. New York is huge. I need Silas. I need Timothy. Send for them. Get them here right away. Okay, and so they eventually send off. Now, before we find out what happens with this story, I have a question to ask. Something that I think it might be just festering in the back of some of our minds. The question goes something like this. The question I had was, why were the Jews so passionate against Paul? That they would actually travel by foot a great distance to another city just to upset people because they wanted to stop his message. He left their town. He's out of their hair. What difference does it make what he does up the street at a different city? Why should Hollanders care what happened in Benton Harbor? Type of a thing. If you don't like somebody pastoring in Holland and you chase him out of town, he goes to Benton Harbor, well, at least he's not here. And we might send a warning or two off to someone in a letter, but that's as far as that's going to go. It's not like we're going to travel all the way south and picket there as well. That's a little bit extreme. So the Jews were really bent on trying to stop Paul. And to apply that to American society a little bit, to try to say, hey, here's this descriptive thing that happened in history. Look, a parallel type event is still happening to the church today. And that is that, isn't it interesting that American opposition as a whole, society seems to be bent on going against Christian values and Christian teachings more than any other religion. And they tend to be hypocritical against Christianity more than any other religion, and they're intolerant of Christianity more than other religions, say, for example, Islam. And isn't that intriguing, that people are willing to gang up like that? You talk to people about Islam, and you say, Islam has all these instances of these little groups that are constantly causing terrorist attacks, and we're looking at hundreds and thousands of people a year are dying at the hands of different Muslim movements and factions. We even had an attack on American soil a decade ago that killed over 1,000 people, and on and on. We look at all these major events. And we talk to people about that, and then they say, well, that's not characteristic of Islam because those are just little faction extremist groups, but that's not characteristic of Islam as a whole. But then those same people will say, you Christians are all radicals and nuts and crazy. You guys are all Westboros. You guys are all like Westboro. And then we're like, no, Westboro is just one little group that's not even part of our team, really. They're just a nut job people over there somewhere. They're crazy. We're not part of that group like that. Then they go, but that's who you are. And we say, well, that small group doesn't represent us as a whole. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. But they don't say that about Islam. Okay, and it's interesting that there's that inconsistency, once again, that you will tolerate one group that is just acting violently on a daily basis, but another group that only has a couple of small little individual moments that rarely even happens on a given basis. Well, that represents the whole. We can't tolerate that. And it's interesting that type of inconsistency. And so I started deciding I need to get to the bottom of this. I gotta have an answer. Why is it that people are so much more against Christians than non? And people would tell me, well, it's because it's God, and they're just going to be against God. Well, here's the weird thing. Islam claims to be from God as well, and people are tolerant of that. Of course, people would say, well, Islam's false. They don't have the true God. Their God's not triune, doesn't involve Jesus. Ours is, so they're going to be against the true God, not false gods. And while I believe that is part of the issue, I just suspect that it's not so simple as that. And so I started trying to do research. And let me just share with you how I do my days, okay? Let me just share with you a little bit of my research methods because my research methods don't make sense, but they connect dots together in an amazing way. So welcome to a moment of inside my brain, okay? You have all taken the red pill, and you're going to see how deep this rabbit hole goes, okay? So congratulations. Welcome to the land of the surreal. Okay, my Matrix quotes are done. So here's what I end up doing. Every morning, I read the news. I don't watch the news. I read the news. I get sick and tired of commercials and seeing people's faces when they talk to me on TV. I want to read it, okay? I prefer that. So I read the news, and I read multiple articles. At least a good hour every morning. I'm reading the news from different sources, different places. So I get emails even from Southern Seminary of like a quick news cap of things that were posted within the last 15 to 20 hours, and they give me headlines and links to click to read articles. So I got all this stuff coming at me. So I'm reading stuff, and so I'm starting to look through this, and I read an article about the history of college rivalries. And I thought, this is interesting. This might actually apply to my discussion. Why are people against Christians more than other religions? Just like, why is it that Michigan State is more against U of M than any other football team? Sure, they want to beat the other teams as well, but there's that passionate rivalry. Why is it that Michigan hates Ohio? Because it's Ohio. Because it's Ohio. And someone said, well, maybe it's because of their location geographically. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. We would be against Indiana and Illinois then. And we're not against Indiana, Illinois. Sure, if they play our teams, we want our teams to win because we want our teams to be victorious, to be number one, okay? But when it comes to Ohio, it's no. They have to beat them, and they have to beat them hard. And they can't just beat them hard. It has to be a shutout, landslide, slam down, in your face, Ohio, ha, ha, ha. Then I'm painting my face, but I'm not doing it for Illinois or Indiana. No. Yes, my team won. Oh, look, they won. I'm so happy. But I'm calling in sick to work because we're playing against Ohio. We got to see that game. Everybody come over. We're going to get wasted. And it's all that rivalry, and it's so passionate. Why is it think of the passion behind Boston and New York. I mean, that's one of the biggest rivalries in the world is between Boston and New York. That's just huge. Okay, and so here's the thing, though. You start looking into this. I'm reading this article talking about rivalries and the origin of rivalries, and I'm finding this so fascinating because I'm not a sports guy. As far as I'm concerned, if the ball gets to the other end, yay, and that's all I really pay attention to. Because if it's not men in shorts with lots of muscles pounding on each other, I'm not as interested. So, because I like wrestling, but I'm not as much about... So that's what I'm about. I'm like, WWE, yay! But baseball, well, did the Tigers win? Well, of course not. They've lost 9 out of the last 10 games. So I'm not even caring. Okay, so here's the thing about the rivalries I found out. That they're all historically charged. That rivalries are historically charged. They're not about just winning. It's based on history that's not even necessarily related to the sport. When you look at the whole issue between Boston and New York, it was actually a cultural war between the Puritans and the birthing of New Amsterdam, and from New Amsterdam to New York City. And it was a major cultural war. So then when the sports teams came into play and they're fighting Boston and New York, it is actually about the New Amsterdam cultural version of modern warfare. And so people saw that if they won, they beat the culture that they were against since the 1600s and the beginning of people traveling to this side of the country all the way into the 1700s. That was all about the Puritans and the birth of New Amsterdam into New York City and all of that. And so this actually modern warfare that's at play. Between Michigan and Ohio, did you know that there was a big battle between the state lines and how the states had to deal with that, and that the sport teams charging against each other was about that? It was like saying, we got our army. It's called the Michigan State University, whatever. Okay, they're horrible. We got U of M now, and so we got them. And so we got real fighters. We don't got junior varsity. We got varsity. And so we got these fighters, and they're going to go into Ohio. And if we win, it shows that we deserved our boundary lines. And if Ohio says, well, if we win, it shows that we should have had our boundary lines. Ha-ha. But see, we don't know the history anymore. It's been lost, but that's where the rivalry started. And then what happened was the rivalry was discovered by coaches and the media as an element to create great marketing. And so the coaches fuel it up, and they call it, this is our rival, and they get the colors flying higher, and they get the people energized and charged up. The media says, hey, we can get in on this. We can sell mugs, we can sell shirts, we can sell bumper stickers, and we can charge X amount of money for tickets. And what we'll do is we'll eliminate the first 2 rows of tickets, and we'll hand them to scalpers. They'll charge $1,000 for a ticket because we get 50%. Why sell it for $80 when we can get $300 from our scalpers? So we'll just take the first 2 rows, give it to scalpers unanimously or anonymously, and we'll just send it out, and on it goes. And we're going to sell tickets and have them available for winning on the radio program, because you too can go to the rival game, and you have to be able to dress up, and we'll even provide you the paint as long as you support your team and say the name of our radio station. And on the marketing ploys go. Okay, and so that's that rival. Now, here's the thing. With Christianity, when it came into the United States was predominantly a Christian nation when it founded. I know there's a lot of historical speculation, people trying to remove Christian from our history, but it was a Christian nation. Was there Masonic influence? Absolutely. Were there other influence? Absolutely. People keep saying, well, look, there were 3 people on the Bill of Rights, on the Constitution, that weren't Christians. Yeah, but the rest of them were. so when you got like 20 people and 3 weren't, it doesn't mean it wasn't a non-Christian nation. It means it was a Christian nation when you have like 17 out of 20, for example. Not the numbers, but you get the point. And so it was predominantly a Christian nation. For the first 100 years, every school that was founded by Christians for the sake of understanding the Bible better. The first 100 universities even, I love the number 100, the first 100 universities were all Christian universities, and they were planted with the goal of teaching people how to read the Bible as well as medicine, as well as other things. And so what the goal was, the Bible. So it was a Christian beginning nation. Then out of that came secularism. Guess who then is the original rival? between secularism and Christianity. So yes, other religions are doing bad things, and they'll say they're doing bad things. They'll say we're not for that, that's bad stuff, but they're going to be more passionate about their rival. So Christianity and the secular worldview is like Michigan and Ohio. We hate each other just because we can. Okay, that's really what it is, and that's why they don't talk well to each other, because there's a fueled, historical, charged event that's happening. Now, none of us were born in the 1700s. My mom comes closer than I do, but but none of us were born in the 1700s, and so we weren't part of that historical battle, but it's like the coaches and the rivals of the sports. It's charged by media and charged by society, charged by schools, charged by publications, charged by the movies, and charged by Hollywood and the broadcasters and the radio, charged by celebrities and this publication and that publication. It's charged. They keep priming the pump. They keep making it right on the surface so that we all still have, with historical ignorance, relevant passion of anger and frustration and intolerance for our rivals. Okay, that's kind of part of the issue that's at play. So that's one thing I started reading. Thought that was interesting. Then, of course, because there's a lot of articles that I'm reading about different things, I read another thing about why it is that millennials are anti-capitalism. I thought this would be interesting. And so I went ahead and I'm reading this article. These are not related, but yet they all point to our current question. Okay, because it's weird. I know. Like I said, welcome to this. Okay, so I'm reading this review of Harvard University's research regarding the understanding of why it is that millennials have suddenly come in force in support of Bernie Sanders and the non-capitalistic way of doing things. And so they're trying to figure this out. And the research ended up concluding that 51% of millennials actually thought capitalism needed to be removed from our economy completely and needs to be restructured. About 44% of them, the ones that were anti-capitalism, were very pro-socialism, but still over half were like, we hate capitalism, but we're not sure socialism is necessarily the right answer. And the only reason they said that was because we heard bad things and we just don't know if they're right or not. And so there's this issue that's kind of going at play there. And so Harvard's looking into this. And then they found out that while they were doing this research, that the respondents kept saying a phrase over and over again that allowed for a secondary shoot-off research that happened. And that was that the millennials kept using the phrase, I feel like. And so they're like, why are they saying this phrase, I feel like? Because what they're feeling like is not an emotion at all. They keep saying stuff like, well, I feel like Bernie Sanders has it figured out. And so which they're like, that's not an emotion. An emotion is happy, sad, angry. Okay, I feel happy that, I feel angry that, I feel upset, frustrated, pleased, excited, I feel turned on. Whatever it is, there's emotions that are involved, okay? Those are emotions. But when they say, I feel like Bernie Sanders got it figured out, or the millennials that support Trump say, I feel like Trump's a doer. Well, that's not an emotion. And so then they started researching, what's this phrase, I feel like? Is it just used synonymously to I believe or I think? Or is it something else? And so a whole other research happened, so that led me to follow some links to another research, also by Harvard University, that I was like, I'm curious about this too, because I hear it all the time in class. Okay, the classes that I teach at both Grace and Cornerstone, the students that are there, if they're under the age of 40, they tend to say, I feel like, and they out the word. If they're over the age of 40, they say, I think or I believe, or my view is. But the younger ones are like, no, I feel like this is the answer. I feel like that's not an emotion, and it's been driving me nuts for a long time, but I just like whatever, it's these kids these days, and then when I feel old, and then when I saw this research, I just went, yes, somebody else noted. I noticed I'm not crazy. Proved certifiably. And so I'm like, I got to know the answer to this. I'm reading the research, and here's what they found out. That the phrase, I feel like, is used only partially in place of I believe or I think, because it allows it for the individual to first not commit to their point of view. Because they say, we feel like that there's that phrase again, we feel like, they said that if we say, I feel like, it pains me. It really does. If I say I feel like, it allows me to change my view. I mean, you can't think something to be true to find out you're wrong and change your point of view. For some reason, it's less personal. because they're just saying, well, I guess, like emotions, you can't trust all of them because you can feel happy for something that really wasn't happy, come to find out. And your emotions can be deceiving because you could be tired, whatever. So they said that first we feel like it's not so personally held. And then second, it makes it more palatable to the other person to hear it, because then it's not me giving my opinion against your opinion. It's us sharing emotions. And that's okay, because neither one has to determine how the other one is. If I'm mad and you're happy, that's okay. We can be mad and happy together. And so that was their reply to this, okay, was we don't have to commit to it, and it doesn't have to offend anybody else. And so which I'm like, well, so if I were to say, I feel like you're stupid, would this be offensive to you, or am I just sharing an emotion here? You know, is that more palatable for you? You know, and so so then it dawned on me, because then after I'm done reading all this, I just went, oh my word. But then my mind went back to my seminary days at Southern Seminary when I was working through the doctoral program. And I read this book called The New Breed of Churchgoers. And I went back to that book, and I'm thumbing through it again, and I'm reading through, because my mind remembers a little bit pages in books. I can't remember where I scrolled, but I can remember where I opened a book to. Okay, and so I'm like, I was right around here. I'm like, flip. Up there it is, and I found it. And what the book said was that in the new church, if they get millennials in, you can't get them to commit to volunteer for assignments within the church very easily. That's very, very difficult because they're a new breed of Christian, hence the name of the book. And they said what you have to do is you don't ask them to commit to a long-term thing, because they don't like commitment. They don't want to commit long-term. They want to commit to an individual one-time assignment, and that's it. So if you want them to be greeters at church every week, you can't ask them to say, would you be a greeter every week? You have to say, we need greeters next week. Would you be interested? And they would do it, and they would commit, yeah, I'll be a greeter next week, as long as it's just next week. I might do the week after that, but I want the freedom to be able to say no. And if I commit to every week, I feel like I'm obligated, and I don't want to commit to that. So I'm not going to commit long term, but I'll commit short term. And therefore, they said that churches have to restructure themselves to have volunteerism developed as a 1 week, 1 day, 1 event only period, and do that every week. To which I went, holy cow, I feel like that's dumb. but that's how it is, okay? And we have to accept that a little bit about that culture. And so I started doing other little thoughts. I started thinking, how does this pan out? Why is it then that the millennials are anti-capitalism and anti this commitment thing? And how does this express, and what does it look like? And that's when I started discovering, well, it's no wonder they like socialism and hate capitalism, because in capitalism, it requires commitment to a job over a long-term period. And if you end up changing jobs, it's not that you change careers with that job. You change to a company that does the exact same job or a promotion at either the same or more pay. And that's the goal. So you're constantly stepping up. Okay, so that's how you're doing it. And if you're changing a career, it's because that career shows how you can step up faster or better. And what millennials like to do is they'll say, I'll work at Burger King, entry level, and there I am making minimum wage. And I might get promoted to supervisor or full-time or whatever and get a little bit of a pay, but then it gets hard and frustrating. I don't like the people, so I'm going to quit. And do they quit to go to another Burger King at the same rate of pay or more pay or for a promotion? No. What do? They go to like Walmart. And they go back to an entry-level position then. And then they begin working their way up. And then when they quit, they decide that, okay, I'm tired of here. I'm going to quit here. Do they go to another Walmart or to a Meijer or another type of super center like that to which they can continue that job escalation? No. They go to a whole other thing that is back to entry level again. Then they start complaining, I've been on entry level pay for the past 15 years, and that's not fair. I can't live off this. Let's raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour while I try to shake fries in a fryer, because that's the only way I can support myself. To which the response is, why do you keep taking that type of job? That's not how it works. Capitalism is supposed to build your way up, not keep going back to bottom, back to bottom, back to bottom. That's your problem. But millennials don't like that, because then you have to commit long term. You have to say, this is my career. Yeah, it is. It's called a word, career. And that's how that works. And they don't like that. And so they don't want to commit. So of course they're not going to like capitalism, because it involves commitment over a long haul. It's capitalism says you got to figure out the stocks. You don't just buy and sell, buy and sell, buy and sell. You buy and you keep it for a while. And you go long term. And on it goes. And so this is the thing. So now you look at what Jesus asks of people. What does Jesus ask for? Long-term commitment that is not just about I feel like. It is about, I know Jesus is the way. I know that he rose again from the grave. Historically, I know. Faith-wise, I know. With my head and my heart, my whole body, I know. And I'm going to commit to it. And when it gets difficult, what do they want to do? Millennials want to jump from this religion to a different religion because it's easier. And that's what they do. That's why you find that people will leave the church for another religion just like that, especially if they're under the age of 40. And we've seen that here. And we're not the only church that's had that happen to us in the past, over the course of even several years. We've seen that happen more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times. We've seen people leave for other religions, not another church. Another religion. Okay? And that's happening across the state, and it's happening across the country, because they aren't wanting to commit. So now what you get is you get the secularist culture, which includes baby boomers as well as Gen Xers. And then you get the lack of commitment of the millennials. And what do they all have in common? Anti-Jesus. That's what they all have in common. The ones don't like him because of their secular worldview that they're dealing with. And then the other ones don't like him because he says, I'm the only way. I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. And they don't like that. And so they don't want it. So they team up with the Gen Xers. And now when you got the millennials plus the Gen Xers plus the baby boomers, what do you have against the church? The majority of the population. And this is why that we have in the year 2015, only 35% of the American population went to church on a given week. That's the statistic of last year. 35% of our population goes to church on a weekly basis. That's what which means 65% don't go. And of that 35%, 25% say that Jesus is the only way, truth, and the life, and that the Bible is the true word of God. So what type of population are we dealing with? You see how small and minute we are. When you look at just the evangelicals alone, what we're looking at in the year 2015 was at 20%. At the best, highest number I can find for research, both by Harvard, both by Pew, and by Barna, and by, I was constantly, 20 is the highest I can find for people who believe that Jesus is the only way. And that's 20% of churchgoers, by the way, not 20% of the population. So when you look at that, only a third of the population even goes to church on a regular basis. 20% of that is what we're dealing with. Okay, it's just mind-boggling. This is our world. So why is it that they're picking on Christianity more than anyone else? Because we're the rival, the original birth historical rival, and all the people have the same common enemy. So temporarily, the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of thing. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with here. So what is Paul dealing with? Something very similar. The story hasn't changed, which means then that we don't have to get discouraged about this, because this is a fight that has been fought ever since Jesus stepped foot on this planet. It hasn't changed. And in a sense, the numbers haven't changed. They started real small in Paul's day. They went up for a while, and now we're right back to Paul's day again. So we're really no different off than Paul was. So it just means then, what does our mission look like from here on out? And that's where we get to look at the rest of the passage here of 17 with Paul, because this is where we get to see how Paul responds to the culture directly, because he's going to interact with Athens directly. Okay, this is before Silas and Timothy show up. So Paul's going to say, here's the response. Here's what we're going to deal with as he tries to engage the culture head on. Here's his message. He says, here's how it goes. Verse 16, while Paul was waiting for them, Silas and Timothy, remember they're on their way, while he was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was troubled within him when he saw that the city was full of idols. They worshiped sports teams. They worshiped presidential candidates. They worshiped stores and shopping. They worshiped sex and pornography. They worshiped whatever. Sound like Grand Rapids. They worshiped more and more excited more about being the beer capital of the United States forever now than they are anything else. Okay, that's what they're dealing with here. So Paul looks around and he sees that it was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with those who worship God, and in the marketplace. How often? Every day, with those who happened to be there. So he went to Rosa Parks Circle, and he went over to this area and that area and just engaged people. Wherever he was, wherever there were people, he engaged them on a regular basis. Anyone who happened to be there. Then also, some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers argued with him. So he ran across some who were educated. They showed up. Some of them probably wearing nice suits, some of them wearing holes in their jeans and really straggly hair with a banana hanging out of it. Either way, we're talking people that are they just immerse themselves into thought, okay? So they came up to him and they argued with him. Some of them said, "What is this pseudo-intellectual trying to say?" They immediately start by insulting Paul as a half-thinker, okay? And that's, by the way, how people are going to attack the church. You're just pseudo-scientific, anti-scientific. You're just your old way of thinking, your old world, your pre-cultured, your mythological, whatever. They're going to just throw that out there. Oh, I see that's what your mythology is all about. It's not a mythology. It's the real creator God. Okay, but that's what it's going to be. They're going to just slander that out right from the get-go. Others even replied, he seems to be a preacher of foreign deities because he was telling good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Can't just talk about Jesus, you also have to talk about the resurrection. Because if Jesus did not rise again, his life meant nothing. It's not about Jesus on the cross, it is about Jesus' empty grave. That is the key element here. Somebody dies, they died. Rising again, that's something to talk about, especially when it's about rising again for the sacrifice of all the sins of all the people over all of time. Okay, so resurrection, absolutely key and vital here. They took Paul and brought him to the Areopagus and said, "May we learn about this new teaching you're speaking of, for what you say sounds strange to us, and we want to know what these ideas mean." So some of them are kind of curious. In a sense, some of these people kind of act like Hindus. They hear something, and they'll just adapt it to their life. They doesn't let it change their life. They just kind of take pieces of this and take pieces of that and add it to their life. It makes Hindus very hard to reach because you don't know if there's actually been conversion. They'll say, "Oh, I love Jesus, and I pray to Jesus every day. I also pray to my other gods every day." And it's really difficult, really, really difficult. Okay, so they want to know what these ideas mean. Now, all the Athenians and the foreigners residing there spent their time on nothing else but telling or hearing something new. Then Paul stood in the middle of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that you are extremely religious in every respect." He's being complimentary to them. "I see that you guys are very religious. You're talking about this and that. You guys are very spiritual. You would make Oprah proud." Okay, I see how you guys are talking. And he continues, "For as I was passing through and observing objects of your worship, I even found an altar which was inscribed to an unknown God." Okay, so he sees what they have going on. He makes the observations. "Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I will proclaim to you. You say your God is unknown, you don't know much about him, you haven't been able to give it much thought. Congratulations, I have the answers for you. I happen to know about this God and the Creator God, and I would love to tell you all about him. So the God who made the world and everything in it, he is Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in shrines made by hands. He is up here, we are down here type of a thing. Yes, he is present, but he is ontologically up here. He is a whole other creative God. He's not the top of a totem pole. He made the totem pole and is above and beyond the totem pole. That's how great our God is. Okay? Neither is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, because he is himself self-sustaining. He does not have needs. He has desires and wants, but he does not have needs. He does not need anything. He is self-fulfilling and self-sustaining, since he himself gives everyone life and breath and all things. So this God needs nothing because he is life. You are living and breathing because you are given that life by God himself. Congratulations. Okay, so Paul continues. From one man he has made every nationality to live over the whole earth and has determined their appointed times and the boundaries of where they live. This is important because it shows God's control here, that God has ordained in some way that your family, your great-great-great-grandpappy would live and work in such a way that his personality would develop in such a way that he would look at your great-great-great-great-grandmama and would find her hot and would want to date her and fall in love with her, that they would end up moving and having a family and moving and having more kids, that those kids would grow up and meet other people they would fall in love with, that you would actually be able to live where you live at the time you live. Okay, it was not entirely an accident. There was freedom of choice, freedom of discretion, and God was also working it all out. It's just amazing, okay? So God's in control. He has appointed the time. He has appointed the boundaries. He's in charge. This is this God. He is sovereign. He rules over all and is in control of all like that. He did this. The reason why he had people have the parents they had, live in the cities they lived with the boundaries that they had, so that they might reach out and find him. In other words, you had the parents you had, in spite of whether they were good or bad parents, you had the parents you had at the time you had them, because that was the absolute number one of all other possibilities, best chance for you to be able to find God. Okay, that is his plan, was for you to find him. Okay, so that they might reach out and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. Even though he's up here and we're down here, he's very much present. And you can be able to come to him at any given moment. He is really not far. For in him we live and move and exist. Sounds like a song? Okay, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Being God's offspring, then, we shouldn't think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, an image fashioned by human art and imagination. We're going to take a little pause here. The thing that Paul is really getting at here, and what he is starting with, is this kind of neat little phrase that I like that is in there, where he kind of says, in a sense, the time of ignorance is over. You guys have been working and living with ignorance. You've been talking about an unknown God, and that time is now over. Absolutely over. It is no longer acceptable or even logical to stay ignorant regarding worshiping an unknown God. The time of this ignorance it's time for it to stop. Okay, no more speculations. No more trying to research this, that, and the other, try to figure out what may or could be. It's time to move away from just pooling ignorance and get together and start asking what it really means, who the real God is, getting the real questions asked, and getting real answers to those questions. That absolute time of ignorance is 100% and absolutely, completely over. Okay, that's Paul's beginning response to this secular culture. You guys are acting ignorantly, and the time is over. You guys don't even know what you believe completely. Well, that time is over. You're saying you're walking around saying, I can't commit, I feel like. Well, not everything is so wishy-washy, can just change and not. Do you feel like 1 + 1 = 2, or does 1 + 1 really equal 2? You need to stop going this whole ignorant route of saying, I feel like it could be, but I'm willing to be open for change. Some things will never, ever change. And God is one of those things that will never, ever change. God is God. And so it's time to get away from the wishy-washy, uncommitted way of ignorance and time to say that time is over. It is time to absolutely grow up. Kind of what Paul goes on to say to Ephesus in chapter 3, verse 6, where in Ephesians there, what Paul says is that Jesus Christ has come, and the revelation of the mystery is that Gentiles are full fellow heirs with the Jews, and that this is all done through the gospel. Okay, so he even mentions that, hey, you know what? Sure, this whole thing about Jesus was a mystery for a while, and not everybody got to find out about it. In fact, when you look at salvation in the Old Testament, how it was done was by being obedient to God. Salvation was the same, salvation by faith through grace. It was all the same, but one thing God did was he overlooked the sins of the people because of their obedience to him and serving him as God. Now that Jesus has come, that type of overlooking is over as well. Okay, that God said now it is Jesus and Jesus only and his resurrection only. And so now the Gentiles are part of the picture with the Jews all through the gospel. And that's Paul's point in Ephesians 3:6. Similar type of thing of what he's doing at Athens. He is telling them the time of ignorance is over. No longer trying to be wishy-washy about this, and it's about Jesus and the resurrection. God's not going to overlook things. It's not horseshoes and hand grenades. Close enough doesn't count anymore. Either you have Jesus or you don't. Either on this side of the fence or you're not. That's how this works. And so he's talking about that exact thing right there. So what Paul does is he continues on then, and he begins to wrap some of this up in verse 30. And he says this, therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, that's what God did. That's what I just got through talking about, where God said, okay, you're obedient. You gave sacrifices. It doesn't remove your sin because sacrifices like that can't. Only the sacrifice of Jesus can, because cows die and they don't resurrect. So every time you sin, you got a new cow, and you can't. It's not an eternal fix. That's Hebrews chapter 10. Sacrifices don't work, okay? And so God had to overlook the issue. And so that's what God did. He overlooked it. But God now commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has set a day when he is going to judge the world in righteousness by the man he has appointed. He has provided proof of this to everyone by the resurrection, raising him from the dead. Okay, so this all points to Jesus, that God is going to prove that he is commanding all people to repent, and it's based upon Jesus and Jesus only, and it is evidenced by his resurrection. So, Paul's response then to the culture that is lost and wandering is a really simple response. What is it? Preach the word about Jesus and the resurrection. That's his response. As people are riding against him, he flees so as to keep himself alive. Living is good, because if you aren't alive, you can't preach. So stay alive as long as you can, flee if necessary, but the point is, day in, day out, some of the goals are supposed to be to preach, to speak. In fact, Paul makes it very clear when he writes to the Romans, which makes sense because he's in the middle of Roman culture now. So now that he sees Athens, he knows how to write to Rome. He knows how to be able to respond to them. So Romans is kind of this great little passage. And in Romans 10, 13 to 15, what he says is this: everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved, but how are men to call upon him whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in the one whom they have not heard? And how can they hear about unless they have been preached at? And how can they be preached at unless someone is sent? Here's kind of the whole issue. Let's wrap this together here so you can kind of see this picture. Let's take Acts 17:30 about ignorance. Let's take Romans 10, 13 to 15. Let's kind of shuffle them together a little bit, and we get something that looks a little bit like this. God calls all people everywhere across this entire globe. I don't care about ethnicity. I don't care about age or gender. I don't care about any of that. God calls all people across the globe to repent and gives them assurance of Jesus' authority by his resurrection. Okay? So God calls all people everywhere to repent. But how are they ever going to know of this assurance through Christ unless they hear? And how will they ever hear about it unless we say something? So this is the charge then. This is 17 coming at us. We need to speak. Since we started with the whole thing on rivals and sports, let's go with that, okay? To talk about someone or not talk about someone about Jesus would be like a player of the U of M football team showing up or not showing up to play. Okay, so U of M is playing a game. And if a Christian who does not speak is like a player not showing up for the game, to which they would reply with, what type of player do you think you are, Sparty? Come on now, play, get in the game and speak. Let's do this. Okay, so that's this whole thing. You're a Wolverine. So you need to practice, you need to prepare, you need to present yourself, and you need to play hard. Isn't that how sports treat it? You practice, you prepare, you present yourself, you play hard. That should be the mantra, in a sense, of the church. That we need to be able to practice, prepare, present ourselves, and play hard. We need to speak. We need to get out there and be vocal with it. One philosopher named Bonhoeffer made a very interesting statement. He said, to not speak is to speak. To not act is to act. In other words, the silence of the church is deafening. Because when the church doesn't talk about Jesus, they are speaking that he doesn't matter. And when the church doesn't reach out to the lost with the hand of love and friendship, and doesn't reach out with the resurrection message to them, what the church is behaviorally saying is that Jesus doesn't matter. He doesn't make a difference. He is not the answer. And here's what the world keeps saying. Hey, we have a violence problem, so let's make rules and regulations. But do rules and regulations really solve violence? That has never been the case. Oh, look, we have a drug problem, so we need to make different laws, making some looser and other ones tighter. Is that really going to solve the drug problem? Hey, we have an abuse problem in the homes and in families. We need to set up better education programs. But has that ever really made a difference in abused homes and neglectful homes? No. On and on it goes, that we keep having the same problems over and over again. Rules and regulations are not going to fix it. Policies and programs are not going to ultimately fix it. It's only going to come by one type of fix, and that is a heart change. And that heart change only comes from the resurrected Jesus Christ. That is it. That is our message. That is our shout out. That needs to be our absolute dead-on response to this culture. Not to go, oh, woe is me, what dark times. Not to go, oh, my word, people are so crazy, I don't know what to do about it. Not to go, oh, my goodness, look at what's going to happen. If Trump comes in, it's going to destroy our nation. Or if Hillary comes in, it's going to destroy our nation. That is not to be our concern. Our concern is that our response is the same. If Trump becomes president or Clinton becomes president, our response is still Jesus resurrected. That does not change. Let's have a closing word of prayer.